Fire Emblem Fates Conquest is a game built for specialists. It loves to throw unique challenges at you that are meant to be tackled in a variety of different ways. As a result, despite what some people may tell you, there is no one-size-fits-all best solution to everything you could be faced with, which gives tailor-made problem solvers a chance to take the spotlight. So where does that leave jack-of-all-trades units? Are generalists ever worth it, or will they just end up as masters of none? And if Silas is supposed to be so good, why does he always feel so bad? Today, I'll attempt to answer all of those questions and more, so without further ado, enjoy the show. Hello! Welcome back to another unit analysis. Today, I'm joined by Farron.
Hello.
If you don't know Farron, that's fair. He is not quite as active in the content creation scene as my previous guests, but he is very active and opinionated about Conquest discussion in general, and he's a good friend of mine, so I thought he'd make a great ad for this series. And the unit we're talking about this time is Silas, the early game cavalier that you get, who has a reputation for being a bit of a mixed bag growth-wise, but he has a lot of qualities that set him apart and make him generally considered one of the better units in the game.
I'd say Silas is usually considered the fourth best character in Conquest.
He definitely is by Zoran.
Yeah, by a lot of people, in fact, like me, consistently he's considered worse than the top three of Conquest, which I'm pretty sure almost everyone agrees is Corrin, Camilla, and Azura in some order. And then a lot of people think he's better than Xander, and Xander would be the fifth best unit.
And that level of perceived viability might seem kind of surprising from what seems like an unremarkable cavalier. These guys are a dime a dozen. You know, your Lowens, your Franzes, they tend to be pretty good, but they don't tend to be that good. So we'll be examining that apparent mismatch in this video. Now, of course, where exactly we're ranking Silas on a tier list is not the point of this video. In fact, we have a whole slide for this. This is not a meta-analysis. I do want to emphasize that, with regards to Silas specifically, to briefly address the topic right now, I personally don't think Silas is top 4, and where exactly I rank Silas, I'm not perfectly sure of right now, because he's the kind of unit where I feel like every unit that's in the same tier as him has a case for being better or worse than him. So in that sense, it's kind of convenient that we're more so taking a look at this unit overall from a wider view without getting caught up in the granularities of who's better than who. Because I don't know what unit Silas is better than. That's still something I'm working out for myself. But I do think he's very good. This isn't the case of someone like Odin, where a lot of people think he's very good, and I disagree entirely. Silas is great. With that out of the way, we can have a look at Silas's first impressions when he joins.
So if you notice Silas's growths, they all seem to be in the middle of the spectrum from 0 to 100. He has very average growths in a sense, on scale of pure linearity, as compared to like other units who will have like 45 to 40, all these growths where you're expecting like, okay, that's average for a unit, but he is average for in general. He's the most average man. Like, say, every other level he gets a stat, or he get a stat every level, or get a stat no level. He's the most variable unit, I'd say. Like, a lot of characters can get screwed, but someone like Effie, who has a ton of strength, will probably never, ever get screwed in strength. Meanwhile, he has just enough to be able to be just as blessed as Effie, but he could also be cursed, unlike Effie. And he has this in several different stats. Effie could be cursed in, like, her speed, her defense, a ton of other things, but she always has one stat she could always count on. That's her strength. Silas has coin flip growths in HP, strength, skill, speed, luck, and defense. But like res, you can expect his res to be low, and you can expect his magic to be 0, usually. But something like, what happens if he never gets a skill level up? What happens if he never gets a luck level up? What happens if he never gets a speed level up, strength, or HP? It could be a little bit bad, and there's only so many stat points you could allocate to a unit reasonably to fix up things. Like, do you want to give him a tonic every single map? But then there's also the case of he could have way too many stats than usual. What if he gets too much defense, and enemies stop attacking him? He's a very variable unit, but overall, at least there's one very big positive. His speed base being 8, you only need 1 point of speed to do strategies for Chapter 10 throughout all of his levels. That's like a pretty good benchmark for him to have. His base stats, they're flat out good, and they're made even better by notably his personal skill Vow of Friendship, and also his other skill, Elbow Room, which we'll get to later.
Elbow Room, for the record, is +3 damage when you're on a tile that doesn't have a terrain effect, which is going to be most of them.
But Vow of Friendship merits a discussion all its own that I will wait until the end of this slide to talk about, because we could talk about his just access to weapons. Like, he has D-Sword and E-Lance. E-Lance may seem a little bad, but this is E-Lance and effectively the first real chapter of the game, and you can get 20 combats in the first map of the game, which means he can immediately go use javelins again, instead of having to wait until chapter 12 to use the Kodachi, or having to spend more and more time using lance rank.
Silas joins in chapter 7, which is really very convenient for him, since it gives him time to grow his speed growth, grow all his other growths, and build his weapon ranks. And having that unmatched availability, except by specifically Corin and the First Servant, and Elise, I guess, it's very good to get him rolling, and get him snowballing past your other units. And like Farron said, the biggest issue is that he needs to hit his growths, and his growths really can turn out in a lot of different ways. 60% strength, 50% speed, and 50% defense means it's extremely possible to get either blessed or cursed in any of those stats, and that will result in a very different Silas, depending on how his growths turn out.
His pair-up stats are honestly pretty good. They're kind of a little bit everywhere, but 2 strength, 1 speed, 1 defense, 1 skill, that's not terrible as personal. And his tag team is pretty whatever. 5 hit at S is nice, but a 6 crit total doesn't do much. Avoid, it's a little bit of everything for both pair-up and tag team.
Yeah, the pair-up is shockingly excellent. It's kind of contributing to the thing where, like, way more units than you would expect have really good pair-up stats. It makes sense that it wouldn't come up with Silas, since most people use Silas as a primary combat unit, but if he gets stat screwed, he can just be a Great Knight and give, like, 4 strength, 5 defense, 1 speed to whatever female unit you want. And that's very good. It's a bit of a utility you wouldn't normally associate with Silas, but it's something he can do.
It really helps that, like, he's good on support and also attacking, so, like, a double combat unit pairing, like him and Camilla, work together really well. Let's not focus on that yet. That's spoiling it. You sly dog, you call me monologuing. Let's talk about Vow of Friendship.
Let's talk about Vow of Friendship. Vow of Friendship is a skill that requires Corin to be at half or lower HP, and when they are, it gives Silas +3 damage dealt and -3 damage taken. So that's functionally +3 to strength, magic, defense, and resistance. Magic isn't important. Resistance largely doesn't matter, but strength and defense are very good. That's +3 is the same as Elbow Room and Natural Cover. If you can find situations to get Corin at half HP, Silas he becomes incredibly strong and tanky, which allows him to be just straight up your best unit in the early game, combat-wise.
Combat-wise, he's the best unit pound for pound until Camilla shows up. He can do the most kills, he can take on the most things, he can get everywhere the fastest, he can kill everything the fastest, he can take every hit. He gets some high stats, and we'll compare it with and without, but know that the best part about Vow of Friendship is that, unlike most skills that require 50% HP, this unit does not have to be at 50% HP or lower. You can have Corin be at a dangerous position, but you can hide away Corin by having him not simply be in enemy range, or behind Silas to give Silas even more damage stack. At base, let's say a C support, and we're going to ignore Corin's parent bonuses entirely this. Silas would have 11 base strength, he's using a bronze lance, then Corin will give +2 with supportive, Vow of Friendship will give +3 damage dealt, and also Elbow Room gives another +3. That is +8 damage stack in chapter 8 of the game. That's insane.
The main downside of needing Corin to be at half HP has less to do with Corin themselves. Corin is gonna be fine. If you need them to see combat while they're at low HP, they have the Dragonstone, which allows them to be very tanky and still see enemy phase combat. That's no problem. The bigger thing with Vow of Friendship is the enemies need to hit their attacks. Granted, they can be fairly reliable, but enemy stats tend not to be as high as your player units. and that goes for the hit rates as well. You can, of course, be at weapon triangle disadvantage versus spear fighters, or you can use the Dragon Stone to debuff your speed. But if you are very reliability pilled, enemies having 80-90% hit rates against Corrin, especially if you absolutely need Vow of Friendship active, it can be fairly inconvenient. That's really the main holdup with Vow of Friendship. But that is notably something that's a lot more relevant in the context of a planned clear, which is not how most people play the game. If you're just rolling with the punches, taking whatever hand the RNG deals you, it's definitely possible to have Corrin be at low HP after doing something else on the other side of the map, and then you can have Silas step in, and then Silas becomes your primary combat unit for those early chapters, particularly on chapters like 8, 9, and 10, and even chapter 7, right at base when Silas joins.
Another important thing about Vow of Friendship is it's modular. You can turn it on and off whenever you want. You don't have to have Corrin as the damsel in distress 100% of the map. Even mid-turn, it can turn off and on. So if you know enemy attack order, you can have your cake and eat it too. Like Corrin fights a guy, and then after beating them and being totally safe, now they're at 50% HP. Across the map, Silas is like, oh, my spidey senses have kicked in. +3 strength and +3 defense.
+3 is actually a huge boost at this stage of the game.
And it stays pretty big. Later on, it becomes less and less viable, but still, it's a good sum. It's a stat setting of at least 6 points, usually 9. A theoretical 12.
Theoretically 12. Well, you can't use strength and magic at the same time, so yeah.
Yes, I guess at cap it is 9. But it's a very good skill, and it really helps out Silas. In case he's missing some benchmarks, you want him to do something, you can work in a new strategy where Corrin takes some damage on the first turn or second turn, and Corrin will now be at 50%, and now Silas can save you a tonic, can save you a strength booster, he could save you a pair up, he could save you so many different things. He's pretty modular. With Vow of Friendship up, his stats become downright disgusting for the point you get him.
Vow of Friendship is usually something talked about in the context of the early game, and that's absolutely the point where it's the most applicable. But it continues to be viable long until the late game, where you might want to damage stack to hit like one-shot thresholds against Master Ninjas on Chapter 25, for example. So you could have Corrin engage in combat against Ryoma, and Silas can get Vow of Friendship up that way. I've done that. It's pretty cool. It's something that's going to be more applicable depending on what kind of build your core goes with. I tend to go with more support-oriented Corrins, like a Parrot bot or a Rally bot. In that context, Corrin can just take one hit and be at half HP for the rest of the map, and they never need to be healed because they're just going to be busy doing support duties. That's not the way most people use Corrin. Since Corrin has incredible combat stats, they are a very popular option for a primary combat carry, which makes a lot of sense. In that context, Vow of Friendship, once again, it becomes very modular. And I think in the context of the mid and late game, where usually, if you are enemy phasing, you kind of have to enemy phase a lot of units at the same time, since Conquest is very fond of overlapping ranges. It can be a little bit more difficult. It's still possible, though, and it's still definitely viable. The bigger issue is enemy hit just gets worse and worse as the game goes on, but you know, we don't have to talk about that.
Yeah. I will also say, if it's turn 1 and the enemy misses, it's a pretty quick reset.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, turn 1, I'd say reliability matters the least on turn 1 and only becomes more and more important as time goes on.
Putting Vow of Friendship to the side for a moment, which there is valid reason not to use, if we want to get slightly more negative for a second, I think one of my primary hiccups with Silas as a unit is he doesn't feel very different from 90% of units in this game. He's just like normal good. He has enough of every stat, and a decent base class, and decent reclass options, but nothing about him reads very exceptional compared to units like Effie or Niles or Baruka, especially after the early game. So that's one thing that can make him feel kind of fraudulent, even if I know intellectually that his traits are very, very good. Probably his most standout attribute at a glance is shelter access, and while that is pretty common, it is the major trait he has over other early joiners at the very least. And its support potential in tandem with Azura's Song cannot be overstated.
Now, looking at his bases and his growths, base stats and base growths, they're pretty high overall. His base growths, they're all in the 40s, outside of 2 stats, and also a skill which is in the 50s, that's pretty strong. Like, he's pretty molded by his class. Like, if he goes into Knight, he can get like a, I don't know, 65 strength, 60% defense. It's pretty modular. And the 40% speed as a personal base, that's not bad at all. Because like if he goes into a slower class like Wyvern, he could still have enough speed to double. And he has enough strength base and defense base that if he goes into something like Ninja, which is frailer, he can have enough strength and defense growths to help him out. It's really nice.
Silas works in both slower and faster classes. We'll get more into this later on, but I think the two most popular ways to use him are as a Wyvern and a Ninja, which are kind of polar opposites in some ways, but Silas makes both of them work. Having like average strength, average speed, average defense.
I wouldn't even call them average. I call these pretty good.
Yeah, they're pretty good. But average in the sense that he's not like min-maxing, he's like a generalist.
That makes it so he's able to both play to the strengths and shore up the weaknesses of whatever class you put him in, which is pretty nice. That's not to say he's totally a blank slate though. We can see what differentiates him a lot clearer now that we're looking at his personal stats. 50% skill and 40% luck growth in particular are very standout qualities that means he's very rarely going to be facing any accuracy issues regardless of his class, which is probably my favorite trait of his stat-wise. A lot of Fates units only have skill or luck and not both, so Silas having both is great. And we can see from his personal bases that he has slightly better strength and defense than speed, so I find he's a lot more likely to want speed stacking than strength stacking, especially considering his base class and damage stacking skills. That basically checks out, based on most of the common testimonials you'll hear about subpar Silases.
Looking at his classes, his inherent kit, and also his friendships here, his inherent class is very important. Cavalier is an amazing class. Great Knight and Paladin are not amazing classes. One reason for this is that as the game goes on, it becomes more and more important to get 1 to 2 range access, but in the early game that doesn't really matter. In the early game, he gets access to 2 of the best skills in the game, in Elbow Room and Shelter, and then has 7 movement, which is some of the highest in the game. But in the late game, he doesn't really have like any 1 to 2 range options in his base class, and like the 8 movement doesn't become as good because it's not on a flyer. And it just kind of falls off. This is why Perry struggles. She struggles to get out of Cavalier. The earlier you are in Cavalier, the better. The later you are in Cavalier, the more you struggle. But his Heartseal class, I feel, is mostly unexplored outside of like as a skill dip for Soul, which a lot of people do. But like Stronger Post at base, getting that is really, really nice. Getting Shuriken Breaker is really, really nice for specifically Chapter 25. Axe Breaker does not really have a use. I'm pretty sure like you could fight Guron with Axe Breaker, but like he's not a threat. But mainly Soul is the skill people are looking at. But he also gets a good class in this class line in Bow Knight. Bow Knight's a very, very solid class and an underexplored option for him. 8 move, uses a previous type of weapon he has in swords, and also uses bows which do not care about weapon rank for most of them. That's pretty good. And with his stats, he's a pretty good Bow Knight.
Cavalier and Mercenary are both good classes to have. Cavalier more so in the early game, Mercenary more so in the mid game. A lot of enemies in the early game are 1 range locked. There are a lot of Iron Club or Steel Club Onis, or Iron Naginata, Steel Naginata Spear Fighters that he could just fight with a Bronze Lance or an Iron Sword or something. And that allows him to see a decent amount of enemy phase combat despite not having unrestricted 1 to 2 range. And in the situations where he wants 1 to 2 range, he can use the Javelin, either trying to one-shot with it with his like ludicrous damage stack, +6 with just the skills he has at base, and then more on top of that, or in attack stance with a dual strike. I would disagree with the notion that Paladin is unusable in the mid and late game. Having 8 movement remains good always, even if you don't fly. Flight is obviously very useful on maps like Chapter 20, but even on something like Chapter 24, which you would usually think of as a very flyer-centric map, that's a map I usually think it's good to have a combination of ground units and flyers, because you can take advantage of the dragon lanes to give your grounded units more movement, and that allows you to kind of have, no matter the situation, very high mobility. Because there are a lot of situations where you would want to proc the dragon lane to slow down the enemy flyers or make a big offensive push. And for that context, I think being grounded is definitely not a death sentence. And it's obviously perfectly fine on chapters like 22, 23, 25, and Endgame.
26.
Yeah.
26, there's no use for flight. Flight stops becoming really, really good after chapter 24, but like the period of chapter 19 through 24, Flight is just amazing. And then after that and before that, it's not really super necessary, but it is nice. I'd say like Paladin Silas is pretty good on Ninja Cave, but then I'd say Paladin Silas is a poor fit for Fox's, Fuga's Wild Ride, and all those maps. But I would say he would be fine as a Paladin in, for example, chapter 25 and chapter 26. More so chapter 26, because there is a theoretical use case of him fighting the Faceless. He's a pretty decent unit for that, because like those Faceless are pretty tough. Most people ignore them. There's like one group of enemies that do not have 1 to 2 range, and Silas can be in that class. He can also be in Wyvern, which is pretty similar, but overall, I'd say that Paladin Great Knight are not like Cavalier, in which Cavalier is dominant for its portion of the game, meanwhile, Paladin Great Knight are not. And if I wanted to stay as a grounded 8 movement mobility unit, I would go into Bow Knight every single time.
Yeah, Paladin it's not bad in a vacuum, but it is outclassed by better options like Wyvern and Bow Knight, and that's the reason most units don't want to stay in it, just because they have better things to be doing. And I think for Silas specifically, we'll actually get more into this a bit later on, but I don't think Silas has a good stat line for Paladin. I think with Paladin, you kind of want to min-max. The generalist stat line doesn't really work for a one-range locked unit like that. You'd prefer someone that specializes in a lot of offense or a lot of bulk. Like Xander or like Perry, they specialize into their niche, whereas Silas doesn't really have much to do that's unique to him. Especially considering Paladin doesn't really have a unique niche. If you want 8 movement lances, you go Wyvern. If you want swords, you go Bow Knight. And there aren't a lot of situations where you want both swords and lances at the same time. Swords and lances are definitely the 2 worst weapon types in the game. As a melee weapon type, axes are clearly better. They're at the better place in the weapon triangle. They're great against ninjas and very common lance users like Spearmasters. And they have a lot of might, which is important in damage stack meta.
And they get the Dual Club, which removes all their bad matchups. But yeah, you get swords and lances, and I will say, usually, every time Silas reclasses, he gets to keep one of his weapon ranks, and if you know the one you're going to keep, he's going to become a kind of a unique guy of that. He could be a Wyvern that has a high lance rank, a Bow Knight that has a high sword rank, or he could become a ninja that has a high sword rank. Not a lot of ninjas could use swords in like a sense as well as Silas could, for example, because I don't really need to, but
Swords on a ninja, it's fine. It's the armor slayer. You can pivot your ninja into an armor killing niche if you need to.
Lances on Wyverns I'm a really big fan of, because first of all, you get so many options of lances. You get the Blessed Lance and the Beast Killer, and those are all the options I was fantasizing about. They do a lot. Like, you get free healing, or you can just blow up anything that has a mount. It's pretty nice, and those are the only good lances in the game, outside of a Bronze Lance.
Javelin, classic.
Javelin, yeah.
Yeah, getting to C-rank lances on Silas is pretty nice to unlock the Blessed Lance and get higher might, and then B rank gives him 5 more hit, which is always useful. Paladin also has Defender, which is pretty good, depending on the way you're using him. A Defender is essentially +1 to every stat when you're paired up, and if you're enemy phasing, you're very likely to be paired up 99% of the time. So that's basically just +1 to every stat. It's Potent Potion, but you don't need to buy tonics. But if you tend to play primarily an attack stance like I do, Defender won't really come into play as much, if ever, to be honest. That kind of sounds like a radical statement, but I really don't use pair up that much in the late game.
I think Defender is just one of those overhyped skills. But, another overhyped skill in a sense, Aegis and Luna. These 2 skills, I believe, provide basically 0 worth in 99% of the situations. Cavalier really stops getting amazing skills once it promotes.
Aegis is better than Luna since it's a defensive proc. When it comes to offensive procs, with specifically damage boosting ones like Luna or Rend Heaven, in most cases you're already stacking to reach benchmarks without them, which is very easy to do in this game, where you have all these sources of stat stacking, like tonics, forges, meals, pair up, the 2 skills he has at base, and then he can also get Stronger Post and Defender from just his innate class lines. So Luna and skills like it can be pretty unnecessary. They're largely outclassed by other ways you could be killing the enemy.
They also can be harmful to you, in a sense that if you were trying not to kill the enemy, and then all of a sudden Luna activates and somehow kills the enemy, you can accidentally rob yourself of, like, training up a weaker unit, or you can expose yourself to too many combats and get yourself killed if you didn't plan for, like, a lucky dodge, you know? It just adds variance to a strategy that needed no variance to succeed.
Proc skills also require you to be using weapons that can actually proc them. Notably, the best weapons, like bronzes and javelins, already can't proc them. So if you want to proc Luna, you have to gimp yourself by equipping a worse weapon that has less accuracy and can crit, which is definitely not ideal. Mercenary-wise, this is not a class you'd want to heart seal into early, but in the mid-game, it is absolutely worth heart sealing into either hero or bow knight. I think bow knight is better, for reasons we'll get into, to pick up useful skills like Strong Riposte, Soul, Axe Breaker, Rally Skill, Shuriken Breaker, and I guess Good Fortune. Which, I mean, you know...
Good Fortune's nice. If you take a lot of turns, it is infinite healing.
True. Theoretically infinite healing. I think Rally Skill on a unit like Silas, well, it's obviously gonna be underexplored because Silas has other things he's gonna be doing. But if you want him to have a turn where he's doing something for support purposes, he's probably gonna be sheltering Azura, and that lets you transfer her and then sync to another unit and shelter Sing, and that will give that unit +3 skill and luck, which is the same hit as Rally Skill. But Rally Skill can apply to more units, so if you're having a lot of units see combat, if you're making a big clear race push, or if you're just spreading your enemy phase units across a wide area, Rally Skill can be useful for that. It's almost never going to be as useful as a second dance, but it can be quite helpful if you are dipping into that class. Largely, I think if you're going mercenary, you're either doing it because you're staying in Bow Knight long term, or for Strong Riposte. Because +3 damage stack on enemy phase is very good. Silas has so much damage stack, it's not even funny.
We're going to talk about why the real reason people always go into Merc. We'll talk about Soul later, but there's one last skill on this side of the slide we gotta talk about, and that's Armored Blow, baby! Best skill in the game, baby! You get level 15, and it doesn't do anything. Isn't it awesome?
Yeah! +10 defense on player phase, where you're already not taking counterattack, probably. Well, I guess, if you're in Great Knight, I guess you are, but you shouldn't be in Great Knight, it's not a good class. Great Knight's basically just, it's Paladin if it had one less movement and better stats, but movement is always better. You should always take movement. Friendship-wise, since Silas is a shared route unit, he spreads his 3 friendships out between both routes. In Birthright, he gets Ryoma friendship, but in Conquest, actually, and also Birthright, he gets to befriend Jacob and Kaze. And those essentially have the same function for him, and that is giving him a dagger class. Daggers are the best physical weapon type in the game because they have unrestricted 1-2 range. That allows you to see large enemy phases, and you'll never find a situation where you can't counterattack the enemy unless you're facing 3 ranged enemies on Chapter 25. And that's extremely good.
One thing that's really good for both these dagger classes is that it will patch up Silas's speed no matter what. These both are pretty fast classes, and the only thing you could really suffer with is the strength and defense. But strength-wise, he has so many damage skills that he'll probably be fine on that front. The only way Silas can get screwed as a dagger unit is if he has really low defense.
Or if he gets really unlucky.
Really. But, like, usually the speed will be enough to double everything. Outside of, like, I don't know, maybe Master Ninjas.
In Butler, speed can be a concern. Butler has good speed, but not over exceptional, amazing speed, like Master Ninja. Butler, stat-wise, is mostly inferior to Master Ninja. I think it's slightly more strength and defense, but the speed lead of Master Ninja is too good to pass up. And Master Ninja also gets soft stats, +5 hit, avoid, dodge, and crit.
One thing that's never talked about with Butler Silas is that he could become like a semi-support unit. Like, yeah, he gets a heal staff and he gets, like, damage reduction auras, but, like, he's not the best suited to be doing that. And also, going Butler means that you're not going ninja. Usually, Butler would be a very, very good choice for him, but because he gets an A rank with Kaze, he never ends up going Butler. The only reason you go Butler is if you need Dagger Silas slightly earlier, because ninja is just better in almost every single way. And eventually you get Shuriken Fair, which will just completely blow out the damage difference. Shuriken Fair is just extra +5 in addition to your +3 from Vow of Friendship, +3 from Elbow Room, and +3 from Strong Riposte.
That makes up for Dagger's low might and Master Ninja's low might. That kind of just makes him very, very good. So, in most cases, you prefer to go Ninja over Butler. There are reasons to go Butler, but it is, specifically a fallback option if you don't want to go Ninja. Kaze is a very busy unit. He has a lot of things he wants to be doing, and he joins fairly late.
He joins at the end of Chapter 11. He joins effectively at the start of Chapter 12.
Earliest you can get Ninja Silas online, if you're not playing any optional chapters, is Chapter 18, which is a very inconvenient time to start being a Dagger unit, because Chapter 18 and 19 are both maps where you would very much like to have D-rank daggers for the Hunter's Knife. That's, I think, the main use case for generalist dagger users on those maps, which is why Butler Silas or Maid Effie can definitely have that niche over him at that stretch of the game.
I will also say, this does ignore any paralogs that you could do, or Invasion 2, which you get that time.
Right.
He has a lot of buffer room to get it. If you're hard going for the A rank, and then you want to do the Soul Ninja build, which we will talk about, he can go into Hero, get 3 levels there, and then he goes into Master Ninja and gets D rank just in time for the chapter he really wants it, which is Chapter 19. There is room for it, especially if you have paralogs lined up, which you probably should at that point. I usually play 1 to 2 to 3 paralogs for the mid-game, and you blow the rest of post-Chapter 20.
Yeah, that's definitely a very common way to go about it, and there are a lot of benefits to doing that, particularly for Silas himself. And in that situation, yeah, absolutely go Ninja, no question. But, if your Kaze is busy building his marriage, for instance, because there are a lot of female units that want Ninja.
To be honest, I don't know if there are a lot of female units who really, really, really want Ninja. I feel like everyone's kind of got a thing they can do.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of females definitely benefit from it. I know Effie, Perry definitely want it.
But someone like Baruka or Selena has another option to get Ninja. She doesn't even need Kaze.
I think mostly in the sense of join time, building Kaze and Silas can be kind of inconvenient. But in terms of the parrot bonuses they give each other, they're very, very good. Kaze gives Silas some speed, which is most likely to be the stat he is lacking in, if he's lacking in anything, which he might not be. And Silas gives Kaze strength, defense, and resistance, which are stats he wants. Or you go all in on strength and defense by proning the Great Knight, but Great Knight isn't very good, so. And yeah, as we saw, Silas's parrot bonuses are very good, so Kaze definitely appreciates that. Skill-wise, Butler gets Tomebreaker, which is kind of nice, since Silas doesn't have very high resistance. But, Res plus 2 and Tomebreaker mean he is very much capable of taking on magical units, like the Chapter 26 Sorcerers, which, it's great, honestly.
The problem is that, Ninja also has very high res. Every time you look at Butler, it's Butler could do this, Ninja also just kind of does it.
Yeah, Tomebreaker is the niche that it has over Ninja here. Of course, dodge tanking isn't something you want to be relying on, but it's very unlikely that you're relying on just dodge tanking to survive a Gim formation. Just giving him the extra reliability is very nice. And then through Ninja, he can go into Mechanist and get Replicate, which can be funny. I think having 2 enemy phase generalists on the field that share the same HP pool isn't really that great, but Mechanist has decent parrot bonuses, so if you want, you can have Replica Silas be the one taking on the big enemy formations, and then the main Silas, who keeps his personal parrot bonuses, keeps his supports with other units, can go pair in the backpack of someone like, Kaze, who he has an A support with, by definition.
Lock Touch is a pretty good skill. Now you get chests and stuff. There are probably going to be other units that have it on your army, but in case you don't want to deploy Niles or Kaze on map, you can just run that as one of your skill slots in a pinch before his build is really fully online. Poison Strike, not too helpful for Silas since he usually just kills enemies. Lethality's bad. Golem Bane, unfortunately, I think Golem Bane's a really cool skill, it just never comes up. It's just a little sad.
It comes up on 2 chapters in the game. 3, technically, actually. It does work against Mechanists and Automaton. Golem Bane is best on units that have good matchups against Stoneborn, largely, since they're the difficult, tanky enemies that you want to be fighting with it. But Silas doesn't really, especially since he's using low might daggers. It's not really what you want to be doing with him. Probably the best use case for it on Silas is fighting the mechanists on chapter 22. And that's kind of it. I guess the automatons.
He already kills them though. It's just a skill that's like cool in theory, but it's just like there's not enough enemies that fall under that category. Live to serve, whatever. It's a whatever on him. Like, he doesn't have high magic, it won't heal him for much, and he wouldn't be healing. Inspiration and Gentium could be useful in a primary combat unit in a sense, but like, he's in Butler. Rally Resistance, he has better things to be doing, as said with Rally Skill. It's kind of just a sad look for Butler, because like, if he did not have a friendship with Kaze, this would be a class like everyone would be raving about, but because he just has better Butler, it's a little sad for Jacob fans out there.
Yeah. Butler is perfectly serviceable. It reaches thresholds. I ended up getting a surprising amount of use out of Butler Silas when I was recording late game footage for How to Train Your Next. Since Silas didn't have a Kaze friendship built, but did have a Jacob friendship built. And he did all the things that Ninja does, but like, slightly worse. He needed a bit more speed stacking. Other than that, it's fine. He's fine. He's the same unit. Until he gets Shuriken Fair, then he's a worse unit.
Yeah.
I have an early game unit. Silas is fairly comparable to Effie. Actually, he's very comparable to Effie in a lot of ways. But in the early game in particular, things look very favorable for Silas. He has a speed lead of 3 at base.
Silas and Effie are rather comparable units in the sense of their strength and defenses. But Silas is usually the kind of guy that doubles to kill, while Effie tries to reach one-shot thresholds. But, funnily enough, with Vow of Friendship, Silas reaches pretty similar benchmarks of being able to one-shot enemies. Eventually, Effie will get more and more strength than him, but at base, Effie has at most 21 attack before ever leveling up, including her personal. So if we include Silas's personal, he gets 19 plus 3. He beats her out, and then has slightly worse defense than her, but has a monstrous res lead, a speed lead, a skill lead, an HP lead, only losing out in luck and defense. Obviously, Effie will change over time, like, she'll get more and more strength, like, pretty much every single level, because she has 80% strength growth, which is just absurd. Well, you already made a video on Effie on what she can do, but Silas is a pretty comparable unit in the early game in that he goes around killing things, being about as bulky as her, but there's one gigantic difference between them besides their speed, and that's that Silas has almost double Effie's movement, so he can go a lot more places a lot more quickly, and overall just does more damage, does more things more places. In a sense, he could struggle to like one-shot the ninjas in Chapter 10, which is the best thing that Effie's at. I think Effie's main claim to fame is that she can one-shot problem enemies, while a lot of your units, like Arthur, may struggle to one-shot those ninjas. Silas might struggle to one-shot those ninjas. Those ninjas are probably one of the most annoying enemies in Chapter 10, and that's a map where you kind of want to have a very solid plan of what to do, and not being able to kill them in one hit is really annoying because they might debuff you, or you might not have enough speed to kill them. Effie can just hit them and they die immediately, which is a very useful niche for her to have. But Silas can possibly do the same thing as her, but he has much better things to be doing in Chapter 10, in that he has more speed, which means that he can reliably double the Onis and kill them in one round, which Effie would struggle with because she would need a lot more speed support to be able to kill them. She obviously has enough strength for it, but she does not have the speed for it, and reaching the one-shot thresholds in the Onis is a little... I don't even know the threshold, but it would probably be really hard. They're pretty comparable in their stats, like they have pretty much the same hit, pretty much the same avoid, pretty much the same hit crit and dodge, crit 0, and their attacks are similar, but Silas just has more movement and more speed, which is just better.
Yeah. If Vow of Friendship is not up, then Silas is probably better than Effie because of his speed and movement. If Vow of Friendship is up, he just is better than Effie. In the early game, at least. And that's very nice. And that speed is actually very, very good. On Chapter 10, for instance, he really likes using that to double Spear Fighters or Onis. We have him here on Chapter 10 with Vow of Friendship and a speed backpack, doubling these Onis, and he's very good at that. He's very strong, he's very tanky, and if you can get him to the speed benchmark, then he is kind of just perfect. It's very, very good for Silas. His stat spread being decent speed and good strength and defense against situations like this. It's a little bit worse against spear fighters, but that is absolutely still a viable option.
The golden numbers for Chapter 10 are notably 14 speed and 30 attack, and Silas can easily reach both of those. That's the numbers you need to one-shot the Sky Knights and kill the Onis in doubling, and those benchmarks are pretty easily made for Silas, especially a Silas that has a Corrin backpack, or working with Corrin on that map. He can handle the entire bottom left, bottom right corner pretty much by himself, with like just one other support unit. It's pretty nice. And you can send everyone else off to the left side.
But the best part is that he doesn't even need Corrin, and that's actually very significant, because I think Corrin is better spent on other units. I usually have Corrin work with Odin or Nyx on that map, if I'm using Nyx as a Dark Mage, which I'm usually not, in fairness. Or he can also help Effie with her one-shot thresholds, or help Arthur with a lot of things. There's quite a few things that Arthur might want. So Selena is actually a pretty good partner for Silas. Much like Kaze, they give each other the pair of bonuses that they each want, even after they reclass. A Wyvern Lord Selena is an incredible backpack for a Master Ninja Silas, since she kind of just gives a little bit of everything. She gives a lot of strength and defense and speed, and a little bit of everything is pretty much what Silas wants, Master Ninja Silas. Since he is a generalist, there's going to be a lot of situations where he's like just shy of where he wants to be in a couple key stats. So that's a pairing that works very well for Silas, and I think it makes sense to build that pairing early on Chapter 10 when Selena joins. It is decent, though it obviously doesn't give Silas any new classes, which he might want if he doesn't want to be a Dagger Juggernaut or a Bow Knight.
And this is also a pretty unfavorable depiction of Silas right here. This is a level 9 Silas. You can usually have a level 11 Silas or even higher by this point in the game. And like, a Selena pair-up does not help out your strength. And if you don't want to use Strength Tonic, you can use Meals if you want. But pretty easily, even just using a base Iron Sword, 0 Forges, he reaches the 30 benchmark. See, 15 times 2, that's 30. Kills the Oni Savage. They're dead.
It's pretty good. Keeping him as a Paladin long-term, we talked about this a little bit, is not quite as great for him, since I think he has a very balanced stat spread, and in some ways that makes him compare pretty favorably to the other Cavalier in the game, but I think that's missing some important context, because as Paladins, what you kind of want to be doing is taking advantage of your high movement to make big player face pushes. And I think Perry is better at that than Silas is, because of her +4 speed lead.
We'll say Silas can get a noticeable defense and strength lead if he just activates Vow of Friendship. If he doesn't, they're pretty even, and like Silas has a hit lead of roughly 10. The only reason that he does not show that here is because Perry's using a bronze sword here and Silas using a bronze lance, so they have around the same hit. But overall, Silas has better strength, defense, and hit, while Perry has better speed. And yeah, she has better res, which is nice, but not as valuable as Silas's leads. They're more comparable than I thought at this point in the game. I thought they'd be very, very different. And the game obviously wants you to compare them because they're the two base Cavaliers, but they're no like Cain and Abel. They're pretty different units. Silas is a lot more bulky and strong and accurate, while Perry really just gets a speed lead.
And they have the same strength. They're both very high strength units. You can look at the stat comparison and you can see why Silas would be better than Perry 9 times out of 10. But in their base classes, I think Silas falters where Perry doesn't. And that mostly just speaks poorly to how Paladin Silas performs.
That, in a nutshell, is why you almost always want to reclass Silas after the early game. So let's see how a reclass Silas performs in the mid-game.
Chapter 17 is a map that you really, really want to start having 1-2 range. This is where Paladin kind of starts falling off. Paladin Silas, for example, his best use in this map is taking on the Swordmasters and the Automatons, but that's not as useful as fighting the 5 billion ninjas that are infesting and crawling up through your walls and the cracks and everywhere. But Bow Knight Silas or Master Ninja Silas, those are two units that can really handle these kind of units. And you put a very interesting thing right here. You put Attack Stance Silas here. That's pretty unique. Usually when I see people take on all those ninjas in like the central room or whatever, they're attacking in guard stance. You want to explain why you have Silas in Attack Stance here?
Yeah, so Silas, as a Bow Knight, has a lot of strength and a lot of damage stack. He gets Elbow Room, he gets Strong Riposte after 2 levels. In this situation, I guess you're reclassing him at level 16 unpromoted, so you can get Strong Riposte. by this point, but And that very high strength allows him to make up for what something like maybe Laszlo might be lacking. Laszlo has good strength, but he doesn't have as good strength, particularly because he doesn't have, elbow room. So while units like Selena, primarily good against the Master Ninjas, not as good against the bulky Mechanists, Laszlo, primarily good against the Mechanists, not as good against the fast Master Ninjas, Silas is fast enough to where he can double the Mechanists, and strong enough to where he can one-shot the Master Ninjas. So I think Bow Knight Silas at this point in the game is very, very powerful. I think if you are skill dipping Silas into the mercenary line in the mid-game, I would highly recommend doing so in Bow Knight over Hero. And the reason for that is it's just way better of a class. There's not much he's going to be doing on this map in Hero, because he has E-rank axes. He cannot use the hand axe, unless you see 20 combats with him on chapter 16 as a hero, but that seems unideal.
Or Paralog.
Or Paralogs, yeah.
Chapter 18 is a much better chapter to go into Hero for. Even then, you still need your 20 dagger combats.
Yeah, I do think Stronger Post is a very good skill. I do think it is worth dipping for, but I don't think it's worth dipping for in Hero. You're probably screaming something about Soul at your screens right now. We're gonna get to it. But overall, I think Bow Knight is a very good class for Silas to be in at the mid-game, which is nice because Paladin and Hero Silas don't have a lot that they're good at in this stretch. And that's a good way to make Silas excellent throughout the whole game, as opposed to just the beginning and the end.
And there's plenty of ways you could do this combat forecast of let's say Camilla is the one blocking off in front of Silas, then she could have even more strength because she could be paired up. You can even cut the strength tonic. You don't even need that. Or you can even use Vow of Friendship here. This is a very, very reliable threshold that these two can make against these guys. And Vow of Friendship makes it to where he can survive even more combats against these ninjas. 8 attack is a little bit much, but Vow of Friendship makes that 5. And then there'll be, of course, more and more with the debuffs, but he can take on 5 or 6 ninjas. He can do that.
Yeah. The Strength Tonic is specifically to counteract the Strength debuff of the Steel Shuriken, which is not applied in this combat forecast, but if it was, it wouldn't be a problem. And, Silas being very strong, very skillful, it matches up really well against this map. Chapter 17 is also one of the few maps where you can get Corin to under half health 100% reliably because of Poison Strike and Grizzly Wound. And that is very nice if you want to use Vow of Friendship for this, though obviously you don't have to.
Most Corins who are not reclassed will not be doing much on this map anyways. Maybe Wyvern Corin would be pretty okay on this map, but I'd say this is probably one of Corin's worst maps. So having them be a damsel for half of it, not too bad. Because swords, they're bad against all the ninjas. Tomes, bad against all the ninjas. It's just Dragonstone, bad against all the ninjas. It's just kind of a rough map for Corin, but this is where Silas can really take up the mantle for him and just really wreck shop, especially with Camilla by his side. Camilla is a really good unit on this map.
He absolutely does not need Camilla, but Camilla is a fantastic marriage partner for Silas. So this is a great place to build that support. So looking at Silas's marriage options, since it's been traditional, I guess, at this point, we can have a look at pairing the Cavalier and the Knight together. If Silas promotes directly into Great Knight, after marrying Effie, which is a very easy support to build because they both join as early as they possibly can, then he can get defense +2 and natural cover, which is potentially +5 defense. Natural cover and elbow room cannot be active at the same time, but it's modular in the same way that Vow of Friendship is modular. You can either maximize your defense or your attack, depending on the situation and what you want to be doing. And overall, I think those two skills are better than what you would get from Paladin, which is Defender.
Notably, the best use of this marriage would be that Silas promotes into Great Knight and then picks up those two skills as he's just in Great Knight, because that's how class access works. He never needs to use a heart seal, friendship seal, a marriage seal, or anything like that. He would completely ignore General in the situation, which you should in almost every situation, because the General's bad. It's not good for Silas, who already has some speed benchmark issues. Now he gets it worse, and his strength is about similar to what it was before, and his defense is better, but not so much better that it matters. It's an okay marriage. If you're going Master Ninja, he does not care about his marriage at all. Silas is the kind of guy that only cares about his friendship or his marriage. And if you do not care about his marriage, Effie could be a pretty good one, and they could give both of them the base skills they have, and like you give like Silas defense +2 for pretty much free, without any investment. Honestly, Silas has some weird marriage classes, and this is like his third best one.
This marriage is more for Effie's sake, since Elbow Room and Shelter are extremely good skills to pick up. Defense +2 and Natural Cover on Silas are more of a bonus. General, it's not a good class. It's funny, I've used General Silas before. If you want to turn your Generalist into a Specialist, really min-max his strength and defense, which are the stats he's probably going to be vested in anyway, then you can. It's funny, but you shouldn't.
I think you mean turning your Generalist into a General.
True! His more valuable marriage classes are going to be along the lines of Azura and Mozu. We can focus on Azura in this case. Sky Knight is a pretty decent class in theory for Silas. It gives him Darting Blow and a lot of speed, which is nice. Silas likes that speed. But Falcon Knight is not an amazing class for most of the same reasons as Paladin. It's outclassed by stuff like Wyvern Lord. Stat-wise, it's unexceptional, and it doesn't have good weapon access. It is Lancelot, which is a bad thing to be. The niche that Falcon Knight has over something like Wyvern Lord is that it can use the Brave Lance. Notably, though, Paladin can just use the Brave Lance too. So it's probably not something you want to marry for specifically. The flight is obviously good, but...
This is where we talk about Kenshi Knight Silas. Kenshi Knight is a really good class in Conquest, but I don't think Silas is a good fit. He does have the strength for it and the defense for it. The Kenshis don't really need defense, but he has the strength for it when a lot of characters like, I don't know, Selena might struggle with the strength for it. But still, he's not a very good fit for it. And the reason why is that he feels like a unit that's more built towards enemy phase with his defense and his speed and everything. And making him another flying bow unit kind of squanders his already good strengths that he has. In addition to that, like, he has a much better flying class he can get into.
Mm-hmm. Kenshi Knight, he can get it one of two ways, through Mozu or Azura. And whenever I've used Kenshi Knight Silas, I've just kind of been disappointed by it, which is really unfortunate because Kenshi Knight's a very good class, but I don't think Silas has a great stat line for it. Kenshi Knight is a class where you'd rather be a specialist than a generalist. You want to have a lot of offensive power, and Silas has a good amount of that, but not really enough, particularly not much speed as you would like, which is really unfortunate. If he had allocated some of his other stats into strength and speed, then he would probably be better as a Kenshi Knight, but as it is, he feels worse than someone like Shigure or Mozu in that class.
Or, you know, your favorite. Your precious.
Yeah, or Nyx, obviously. Nyx is the best unit ever made. End of story. That's just how it is. Anyway, if you want to put Silas into a flying class, Sky Knight's an option, but overall, he's much better off marrying Baruka or Camilla to get Wyvern Rider. Wyvern is very, very good for him. It gives him very good skills, Strength +2 and Lunge. You can get Swordbreaker, which is occasionally useful, or if you go Malignite, you can get Savage Blow, which gives you some AoE chip, which is pretty useful to reach benchmarks with your other units. And then Trample, which is +5 damage against non-mounted enemies, which is most of them. It's pretty obvious why Trample is good.
He also gets Rally Defense, which is just the thing that every Wyvern Lord gets. But the thing about Wyvern that's so good for Silas is that it's pretty much just Cavalier, but now you have a better weapon type, and also now you fly, and you have like arguably better defense. And also you get new skills in Lunge and Strength +2. And Silas is the kind of guy that has enough speed in Wyvern to like double and kill, while like someone like Xander does not have the speed to double in Wyvern usually. That he has to go for one-shots. Silas is a well-documented, very good Wyvern, and also like it's +7 to add to his damage stack. Greed. That's Vow of Friendship, Stronger Post, Strength +2, Trample, and Elbow Room. It's so much damage.
The amount of strength that Silas has in Wyvern means he could absolutely just go for one-shot strategies. Against frailer enemies like Onmyojis or Master Ninjas, he could use, a Forged Steel Lance or a Forged Hand Axe and just kill things in one hit, which is really nice, actually. Or, since he has pretty decent speed, he can double depending on the situation. He's very good, and he can be good in a lot of different ways. Rather than someone like Selena, who's pretty much just going to be doubling, or
the aforementioned Xander,
who's pretty much just going to be going for attack stance stuff. Silas is very modular. He can do whatever Wyvern tasks you want him to do, including power up or rallies. He can kind of do anything. He's kind of the perfect unit.
He just becomes like your good flunky. Not quite a flunky, but like the step above flunky. He's not the guy that's like killing every single unit in the game, but he's solving problems for you. Let's just say that. He's a problem solver.
Hey, sometimes being a problem solver is better than being a kill everyone guy. That's just how it is sometimes.
And he can be a kill everyone guy in 19.
Yeah. Beastkiller Wyvern Lord Silas is very, very good on Chapter 19, or maybe against like the endgame Paladins or something, but you know, you probably have a lot of units for those. It's a very good class. I think there is a decent argument for Wyvern Lord being Silas's best class. It has everything you could ever want. It's highly mobile, very strong, very bulky. He can double when he needs to. It's very powerful. Obviously, every unit is good in Wyvern, but Silas is uniquely versatile in that sense.
Yeah. I'd still say that I think that the Master Ninja is better, but I will say that's more prone to getting stat screwed. If you get a stat screwed Wyvern, they still have sky-high stats. And if you do get stat screwed, you at least have Soleil as a fallback of like your new Soul Ninja or whatever you want to do. Soleil can do pretty much the same thing. She's just less likely to be stat screwed depending on when you get her. I think Wyvern is Silas's most consistent class. A -7 strength Wyvern Silas is still pretty good.
Also, the skills that Silas is taking into that class is very good. Elbow Room Shelter are two of the best skills in the game. Incredible damage stack and incredible support potential. There are a lot of units that get Elbow Room Shelter in Wyvern in fairness. Xander gets it. Perry, if she's marrying Xander, gets it. Secret gets it. Sophie might get it.
Gunter gets it.
Gunter also gets it. But Silas also has Mercenary, so he can take Strong Riposte and Shuriken Breaker into Wyvern Lord. And I am a very big fan of Shuriken Breaker on Wyvern. If you have a very strong hand axe user with Shuriken Breaker, Chapter 25 is solved. You've beaten the map. You did it. And then he also gets Swordbreaker, so the Swordmasters aren't a problem either.
He beats the Swordmasters there too. That's hilarious. I didn't even think about that. You always think about the Master Ninja Shuriken Breaker build there. You can just do it in Wyvern if you just manage to one-shot the ninjas somehow. Which, I guess he could.
It's not that hard, honestly.
Especially if he gets trample.
The Chapter 25 enemies don't really have a lot of stats. The reason Chapter 25 is hard is not the stats at all, it is specifically the enemy formations. But Silas, having high move, having Swordbreaker, Shuriken Breaker, it makes him a very good breaker of those formations. The one thing he's going to have to be conscious of is the lunge automatons, but there are a lot of ways you can deal with those. He's extremely good throughout the game, and particularly on Chapter 25.
One thing I do want to make very clear is there are other units that can replicate these contributions. Surprisingly, Shelter, Shuriken Breaker, Wyvern is less unique than it sounds. But getting these tools this conveniently, combined with his great stats in this class, particularly strength and skill, is very, very powerful. You don't have to be irreplaceable to be good, you could just be the cream of a copious crop. Still, there are ways in which a lack of uniqueness can hurt Silas.
He's not the only Cavalier turned Wyvern, and he has some strict competition with the other one, as shown on this slide.
Yeah.
So, Silas versus Xander. The reason we did 17/9 level 7, because that's how effectively the same levels work out, because of internal levels and all that. But overall, the main differences you can see is that Xander has a lot more defense, while Silas has like 4 more speed, but Xander also has arguably more attack, unless if you have Vow of Friendship up, in which Silas wins, just by 1. Overall, Silas having 4 more speed is actually, I'd say, a bigger difference than the strength and defense lead, because speed is a benchmark stat. If you hit the benchmark, you win. If you go over the benchmark, it doesn't matter. While, like, strength and defense, you can go over, and it could be bad for you, at least in the case of defense. But Silas having that high speed, like 19 speed at this point, and, like, he gets any kind of speed support from notably his best friend Kaze. Xander can also have that, but Silas also has a lot more time to train that, and the speed supports, he has +4 naturally, and he can reach the doubling threshold a lot easier than Xander can. Overall, they're still pretty comparable. Silas is a pretty comparable unit to Parry and Xander.
The main thing Xander has over Silas is that he's free. You get him in Chapter 16, he's level 4 as a pal, he gets Defender in 1 level. He has Siegfried, big 1-2 range sword. He doesn't even need to reclass to get unrestricted 1-2 range. In this situation, as Wyverns, he just has it as his heart seal. He doesn't need to vary for it. So overall, Xander's going to be a lot lower investment than Silas. That's his biggest thing. He's also more specialized. He has very high defense. And if you really want to survive a huge number of enemies in one turn, having a lot of defense is a great way to do it. He's kind of just not threatened by, for example, Chapter 19 Kitsune, or something like that. This is a situation where I would say being a generalist is better than specializing in defense here. I agree that the speed and hit lead is more valuable than the defense lead here, since Silas is going to be bulky enough. He'll live attacks, he'll be fine. But I wanted to point out the defense lead because I think it sometimes goes under discussed just how huge it is, because +9 defense.
It's massive, and also the HP. It's +9 defense and +6 HP.
Xander is incredibly bulky, whereas Silas is adequately bulky. I would take adequately bulky here. Long term, I think Wyvern Lord's Silas is better than Wyvern Lord Xander. But Xander being free is very difficult to pass up.
We didn't even consider stronger post here. This is just some Silas Cav into Wyvern. So in theory, Silas could have a little bit more strength than Xander, but overall, with the similar levels of investment, Xander becomes better at certain things and Silas better at certain things, but I'd say Silas's things, he has enough in every stat, while Xander has a surplus in defense, but not as much in speed as he'd like.
And hit. I think the hit is probably... It's not an issue for Xander, but it is his biggest issue, if that makes sense. It probably doesn't, but that's just how it is.
Moving on to the other comparison for his final build, it would be Kaze as a Master Ninja. Kaze and Silas, I feel, even though they're both Master Ninjas, they do entirely different things. Kaze is a very much support type unit that really, really has a niche against mounted units and magic enemies, especially magic enemies. He is the best anti-mage unit in the entire game, and he has the stats for it. He has kind of lowish strength, but you don't need a lot of strength to kill mages. And the lowest strength might look bad against mounted units, but you forget the Hunter's Knife exists in this game. And now suddenly Kaze can just shred any cav in this game. And he has the speed that he'll never need to be buffed for it. And he has the res that he'll never be buffed for it. Kaze's a very self-sustaining unit that handles his niche very, very well. He has an amazing pair-up. But Silas does something that he can never do. He can handle pretty much anybody in the game. He can handle berserkers. He can handle not quite generals, because he'll not do so much against them, but he can handle cavaliers. He can handle anybody that's not mounted. He can handle spear fighters. All these different types of enemies, because Silas has more defense, and he can get even more through Vow of Friendship. And he has serviceable speed for this, and he'll have enough damage stack to where he'll be able to kill a ton of different enemies. And this is like the lowest investment Silas possible, lowest investment possible Kaze to compare the two. They're more similar than I thought they'd initially be. The biggest thing where they differentiate is their speed, res, and defense. Silas has good res and defense, but Kaze has amazing resistance with kind of subpar defense, and also their strength. Silas will have more strength than Kaze, but Kaze's no slouch. He'll probably have B rank daggers by this point, so where they're pretty comparable.
Kaze goes all in on his particular niche, which makes him the best unit at a lot of specific tasks. Mage killing is the obvious one. He's also very good against Falcon, Kinchis, Paladins, and then he's probably the best Swordmaster killer in the game. Since Swordmasters are fast but not that bulky, Kaze being able to double them means he doesn't care too much about his lower strength.
It's him or Camilla with the dual club.
Dual club Camilla isn't that accurate.
Or I guess Baruka with a dual club, because she'll just hit them.
Yeah, you're right actually. Baruka's good. Silas being pretty good at every task, as opposed to extremely good at a few specific tasks, I actually don't prefer here. For this comparison, I would take Kaze over Silas here, because I think Conquest is a game that definitely rewards specialists. But that's just how I play the game. I am very player phase oriented, so I tend not to get much use out of enemy phase generalists like Silas. If you have a more enemy phase oriented playstyle, Silas is very good, and he might be better than Kaze for your purposes, but it definitely comes down to preference.
And jobs. Depends on what jobs they're doing.
Yeah.
We're not done comparing Master Ninjas, though. There's one last thing, and that is the almost Master Ninja Xander versus Master Ninja Silas. This is their end-game builds.
Essentially, this is comparing the two main enemy phase generalist builds that people talk about. Master Ninja Silas versus Hero Xander. Another way those two units are very comparable.
And this is where stats become very, very different, because almost every single stat here has a pretty big swing. As you can see, Silas is leading on skill, speed, and resistance. And now he's starting to look like Kaze, and Xander's starting to look like Silas from the previous slide. But the thing that Silas has over Xander here is that he has an absurd amount of damage stack, and enough damage stack to where he handles a general amount of enemies that he'll kill them. But he also has so much speed that he needs no support from that and can focus on building up his strength. While Xander, this is level 15 promoted, he only has 21 speed. He's going to still need a decent amount of speed support to handle what he wants. And at this late in the game, this is looking like chapter 26 levels. That's where these two are the most comparable. Silas is the kind of unit that would be very good in the mage room in that map, and Hero Xander would not be. But Hero Xander would be good on the bottom room in that map, where Master Ninja Silas wouldn't be. It's all about specialization versus generalization. Once again, Silas is Mr. Generalist. He's the most flexible, and also I do gotta talk about this. Xander's stats are truly absurd in just 3 locations. He has so much attack, so much HP, so much defense. Jesus Christ.
That's kind of what this whole video comes down to, is Silas, he spreads out his talents very wide, to the point where even his resistance, which is a stat that if you were keeping him in Cavalier, it wouldn't look very good, but as a Master Ninja, he can fight both physical units and mages. Granted, physical units are going to be a lot more common, so Xander's plus 13 defense lead, that's going to be more applicable most of the time, but Silas can fight mages. You can throw him at essentially any enemy group, whereas Xander is going to be more conscious of mages. I won't say he'll struggle against mages, but he'll have to keep them in mind. And then Xander also has a crazy attack lead, oh my god.
But also there is one thing that Silas is clearly winning on here. He's winning on that hit lead, baby. Look at that. That's like 20 hit. That is 20 hit. That's 21 hit.
True. Once again, Xander's biggest quote-unquote issue is hit rates. Siegfried has 80 hit. The weapon that Silas is using here, the Iron Dagger, has 92, because it's a +2 forage. If he was using a bronze weapon, which I actually recommend most of the time, then that hit lead would be even greater.
But then the attack lead would be even greater too.
Yeah, you don't worry about it, it's fine.
It may look like a terrible situation for Silas here, but that 29 speed, that +8 speed lead is pretty massive. Because, like, how much speed can you realistically get on a pair-up?
I think Kaze gives like 6.
Yeah, they both have access to Kaze, though, I will say. 8 speed is a lot, and speed is a benchmark stat. You can waste speed, but I don't think Silas is at that point of where he's wasting speed. Kaze will hit his speed cap, and he'll just have speed he will literally never need. Xander will hit his strength cap, he will hit strength he will never need or never get to use. Silas is in the between the two of those where he has a good amount of strength and a good amount of speed, and that he uses just every single bit of it the most efficiently in most situations. Obviously, there's situations where you want to use certain units and you don't want to use others, but I will say Master Ninja Silas gets to be in a lot more situations than most units. It's only in truly extreme circumstances where he'll be, like, outclassed in every way.
Yeah, Silas has enough of every stat. That's kind of his MO. He does what is needed of him. But I think for this comparison, since defense is a lot more complicated than a simple binary, you hit the threshold or you don't, having a lot of it is going to be very valuable in a lot of situations. Particularly in tandem with this skill that they both have, which is Soul, but also without it. As enemy phase generalists, Silas's main niche here is speed and resistance. And skill, right, yes.
Alright, but you just mentioned a skill. What'd you call that skill again? Can you say that? Say that again.
Soul.
Soul! It's all coming back to me. It's all coming back to me that I made a slideshow specifically for this in the slides, and I took into account everything. I've done the math, and I'm here to finally talk about Soul. Soul is a skill that I feel has a lot of disinformation surrounding it in the community. There are people who say it's one of the greatest skills in the game, and there are people who say this is one of the worst skills in the game. And I took it upon me as my task to really focus upon who's right, who's wrong, and is everyone just crazy? Now, the one thing that people do not understand about Soul is this. Soul is not unreliable. It's not. Let's take this Silas from the previous slide. Not the previous slide. Originally, this was the Kaze slide, but whatever. Give him a Zerb Song and a tonic to give him a 30 skill flat for simple calculations. It's a 30% chance to activate Soul every time he attacks. Silas will be doubling, so now every single combat, he has a 51% chance to activate Soul in that combat. The way you calculate this is at 1 minus the chance of failure. So, for example, in the case of failure in this case is 1 minus 0.7 times 0.7. 0.7 is the chance he does not activate Soul. You would continuously multiply that several times, because, for example, flipping a coin, you flip a coin once, 50% chance for it to be heads or tails. Flip a coin twice, 50% chance for it to be head or tails. The chance for it to be heads twice is 25%. 1 over 2 times 1 over 2, which is 1 over 4, or 25%. That is how you do basic statistics, and to find the chance of success, you subtract the chance of failure. Every single hit Silas can take expands upon this chance. If he can take one hit, it is now 4 chances to proc Soul, a 76% chance. Still pretty unreliable, but this is assuming that he can only take one hit before he dies, so on the second hit he will die. Because of one thing. Guard Gauge expands upon all of this. Soul is very, very reliable, and specifically Fates. If Silas can only take one hit before dying, Guard Gauge will prevent a second hit from killing you, meaning you now have 4 chances instead of 2. Every extra hit you can take skyrockets the chances. If Silas can take 2 hits, then you get 8 chances, with the chance to activate Soul once at 94%. That's a pretty good reliability. This is all assuming he needs to activate Soul once. It becomes more and more complicated if he wants to activate Soul twice. I'll talk about that later. But if Silas can take 3 hits, he gets 12 chances, which is 98.6% chance. I'd call that pretty reliable. Finally, if Silas can take 4 hits before dying, which is a pretty easy thing to do for him, he'll have 16 chances to proc Soul. Just once, and that chances of that are 99.67%. Now, there is one thing to talk about here. Soul is a little overkill. There's not many situations in this game where, be facing more than 6-ish combats per enemy phase. Usually the best case scenario is that you get action, economy, and free healing and don't need to heal. However, in situations you want to stop thinking, just trust the math. Please trust me. You can do this yourself. Just do 1 minus fail chance consecutively, how many ever times the chances he has. If you give him the defense, it will all work out. If you want to calculate the chances of needing 2 or more Soul activations, use the binomial probability formula. You can find it online. But usually the situations that Silas needs to activate 1 Soul before he dies, and that situation is already pretty rare. But I want to say one thing. Soul is not unreliable. However, it's not the best skill in the game. This was a basic statistics lesson by Farron.
Thank you for the Soul haterism and also Soul haterism. That's kind of awesome.
I'm playing centrist. I'm pissing off everybody.
Exactly. I have my own opinions of Soul. I think there's more to talk about with this. Like Farron said, in most cases, because of the way enemy formations just are in this game, you're usually not facing more than 5 or 6 enemies in one turn. That's just how the enemies are spread out. There's usually not more than 5 or 6 in one place. There are exceptions to this. The major ones.
Chapter 19.
Sometimes, yeah. Not always, but there are some strategies that play out that way.
There's like chapter 17 too, but I don't know if you get Soul by that point.
No, you don't have Soul Ninja Silas by that point. And there's Setsuna's whole formation in chapter 24. At first there's only 3 enemies there, but the enemies will move towards that location, and so by the time you get there, It's very possible for there to just be like 10 enemies there. That's a situation where you might actually really appreciate the extra healing from Soul. However, that's not a good place for Silas in the first place. Setsuna has a lot of speed. It's very difficult for Silas to double her, and she's going to deal a lot of damage back. If Silas isn't doubling, then that's less chances for him to proc Soul, that's less guard gauge he's building. There's also Shuriken Breaker on Miyojis. It should be obvious why that's bad for Silas. His resistance is good, but it's not as good as it could be. And then Shuriken Breaker means he could miss, and if he misses, he doesn't proc Soul. Then there's the Oni Chieftains, which are very bulky. So in addition to all the speed he needs for Setsuna, he also needs to stack a bunch of strength, which he can do, but needing all this strength, all this speed, probably a lot of defense and resistance, just wanting for all of this, makes him not your best option for enemy facing that portion of the map. I would say a Dark Knight like Ophelia would be better for that, or Leo. So, while in theory that seems like a situation where Soul would benefit Silas, in practice it's not really somewhere you want to be using Silas in the first place.
There are points in the game that you can find Soul to be useful, but the problem is that they're not very numerous. I'd say probably the best two examples would be Kitsune Lair, and then the other one being Chapter 26. Chapter 26, there's the Mage Room, and if we ignore Kaze's existence, he's really good at handling all them there, and handling other units. If there were physical units there, he'd be better than Kaze, but unfortunately they're just not. And it's just that there's not really a lot of places where you can really let a Soul ninja go free outside of Paralogs. I've been told by Zoran that Soul ninjas go crazy in Valorialog, and I do not doubt him, because that map you mute all magic. So of course they would just become the best build immediately. But in the main game, there's not too many opportunities to properly abuse Soul tanking, because there's just not many situations that demand it. And if there are, you can still play around them. Like, for example, Kaze can handle the Mage Room without any Soul, because he just has naturally higher resistance. It's a good build, but the environment just doesn't need it. Even with Xander, he gets Soul from Hero, but he doesn't need Soul to survive the bottom room. Soul or not, he's gonna die on the second turn unless you shift your strategy. Or he won't die turn 1. He's never dying turn 1. Overall, Soul is just kind of an unnecessary skill, but I would never call it bad. The way you make it bad is you put it on a unit that's a hero. You leave it on a hero, and they're one range locked, and they can never use it. You already have HP, action, and economy. It's called good fortune. It's random.
There are basically two outcomes for Soul. Soul is basically only good in the sweet spot of you're not tanky enough to where you could just defense tack to survive everything, but you're also not frail enough to where Soul is going to be unreliable in helping you. Most situations will fall under that first case, so it's useless in the same way that Luna is useless, where you could just stat stack to not need it, and then what's the point of introducing that variability? The other side of the coin is slightly more interesting, but not really better for him.
If you want, sure, you can make Silas do things that he probably shouldn't be able to do. The Chapter 26 Sorcerer Room, he can have Soul, and he just adds dodging. He can simply dodge attacks. Those are all different ways for him to minimize the damage he takes, and he can fight this. But the situations where Soul can be useful are usually, by nature, places that your Soul users don't want to be anyway. To prove my point, when I actually recorded footage for this enemy phase, Silas got crit by the Mjolnir guy and died, and no Soul proc could have saved him because it one-shot him from full HP. And that kind of just shows why Soul is not the savior of Conquest that some people say it is. It just makes units capable of doing things that they already shouldn't be doing when you have other units that are just better at accomplishing those tasks anyway. Essentially, the only reason you would want Soul is if you're going hard in soloing most of the map with one unit. But honestly, I don't think most of these Conquest maps are really built for that. I think almost every, dare I say every, late game chapter is easier with a wider army trying to primarily play on player phase.
Silas here is an okay-ish counter to the room, but this is obviously before we factor in any auras, such as like Elise's or like Inspiration plus Demoiselle / Gentium or whatever. And like Soul doesn't really help him so much here. He hits the dies in 3 hits threshold, and honestly these sorcerers have better hit than I remember, because usually with Master Ninja Soul tanks, they have high avoid, and they could use that to also help bail them out, but they could also crit, which they could also get ruined by, so it's kind of mostly a wash in the favor of avoid slightly. Also, this Silas has lock touch instead of stronger post.
It's so he can open the door.
Yeah, I guess, but you also break the door.
Mm-hmm. Because the mage in the sorcery room have freeze and enfeeble, that's gonna tank Silas's avoid by a lot. And that takes away a big aspect of what soul tanks use.
This is an actively suffering Silas right now.
Yeah, it's not a situation you want your Silas to be in. It's more so a situation you're forcing him into by avoiding the other tools you have access to. And that's unfortunate, because this is, like, one of the better use cases for Soul. And if this is this skill ceiling, then, yeah.
It's just not amazing. Like, only place where I'd say it's really amazing is Chapter 19 and some paralogs. Probably Percy-log. Percy-log is probably crazy. I mean, not if you want the money, but, like, if you want to kill things, like, oh my god.
I think even on Chapter 19, Soul is kind of just outclassed by units that have a lot of defense in the first place. Beast Killer Benny or Wyvern Silas will probably perform better than Soul Hunter's Knife Silas on that map. It's unfortunate.
Soul tanking is at its best it's ever been in this game, except for maybe Awakening, in which you could just get really high skill and you could fight a billion enemies. But like Guard Gauge makes it theoretically that you can survive so many combat rounds and just need to hit once or twice. But now it's just Conquest is all about tricky formations. But then in Rev, Master Ninjas can't do what they want, and in Birthright, there's not really an easy way to get a Soul Master Ninja outside of Silas, in which, yeah, actually he'll probably be pretty good in Birthright. That's probably his best place to be a Soul Master Ninja, and your name will be Silas. But even then, like, you don't really need Soul that time, because, like, enemies are so weak. I don't know, it's just kind of a sad situation of like, yeah, Soul has a lot of potential, it's just, it doesn't really live up to it because it just doesn't have the chance to. I don't think Soul's bad, but its use cases are just not really seen. It's definitely the best proc skill though, for sure. But in conclusion, Silas is a pretty versatile guy. Like, we covered 3 different builds of his, actually even 4 with Paladin. We covered Bow Knight Silas, we covered Master Ninja Silas, we covered Wyvern Lord Silas. This guy can do a lot of stuff. And like, combine that with him already being good in like all those classes being good at generalist roles, he can cover most situations in the game. You can always count on like Silas being able to do something outside of like very highly specific niches, like that you have other units like Kaze or Xander or Azura or someone else to fill for you. Silas will be a pretty good combat unit. Maybe not your primary combat unit, but like your second best, third best one that can cover so many different situations for you. He's a pretty versatile guy. I can definitely see why some people think he's the 4th best unit in the game, and I think he's definitely top 10.
I tend not to be very high on enemy phase generalist as a role. I think most units prefer to specialize, but Silas is so clearly built for this. He has everything he needs to be this generalist, and he can do that in a lot of different ways with a lot of different classes. He doesn't have to be a Master Ninja. He can fly if you want him to. He can use bows if you want him to. He's very solid, especially since he joined so early, and he can get working on supports and experience and get the ball rolling very quickly. It's very easy to keep Silas along for the whole ride, for your whole journey. Really, the biggest hump is in the mid-game, but that's really not too bad if you're skilled at being a Bow Knight, or if you chain a couple paralogs. So it's really no problem.
The only way I think that Silas will end up consistently bad is if you just keep him in Paladin.
Yeah.
It just ends up like, dang, he just kind of is mid eventually. But if you reclass him, He's very, very strong. He's a slight investment kind of unit to medium investment. Overall, Silas can do a lot for you. Even if you get stat screwed, he always has fallback options of, oh, I can go Wyvern, oh, I can go Bow Knight and be a flunky, I can be a Master Ninja that can handle most of the game. He's just a very versatile guy that can do a lot.
Yeah. I think the reason that he can feel bad sometimes is primarily just because he doesn't immediately excel at anything. I do think Silas's biggest weakness is that he requires a seal to be anything better than like your 15th best unit.
And that's an investment you're probably not very tempted to give him on account of, subjectively speaking, he's kind of boring, and his late game performance is not above and beyond a lot of other units. If he's the best or the second best at any given task, it's always because of a very slight edge. Even Soul Ninja, which is heavily associated with him, has Soleil, who is arguably cheaper than him. So emotionally he doesn't feel very special. He's got the early cav unit feel blues. But what you do have to keep in mind is this is a unit who has probably been carrying you a lot in the early game. So taking that into account, this unit who is exceptionally powerful for one stretch of the game, and transitions into being, if not unique, at least still very good, it makes a compelling case for why people value this unit so highly. So that's a way in which this unit, who admittedly feels kind of identical to anyone else who could be fulfilling the same tasks as him, is better than those units. It may not be an argument that an average player will take into account when deciding who to use long term, but it is a very valid reason to value this unit so highly. And I think that's helping me understand that perspective a lot more. And it's also worth mentioning, most units in the game want a seal to get something done. That's hardly unique to Silas. So taking everything into account,
I absolutely understand the perspective of putting him at top 4, even if I don't agree with it. That's not what this video is about, though, so I'm just going to leave it at that. Anyway, that will be it. Farron, do you want to close this out?
Yes. I would like you, yes, you, to subscribe to my good friend Coding Ant here. She's my pal, she's my buddy. And after you do that, I would not mind if you went over to my YouTube channel and subscribed, where I might upload. Theoretically might. I'm planning on uploading the soul portion of my channel, and I guess if I were to shill something else, play Pokemon Conquest Read Hero Killer. That's about it.
True. Yeah, that'll be it. This has been Coding It, and I will see you next time.
This has been Farron. Bye.